Thanks, Josh. Proud to be here. Um, as you mentioned, I work for Raceline Alternative Energy. I'm the Director of Communications. Came to Raceline from a job as Executive Director of the Conservation Federation of Missouri. Saw a lot of opportunities to continue conservation work in the energy industry, and I've been very proud of what we've been able to accomplish at Raceline in partnership with Smithfield Foods in North Missouri. I'm joined today by Patrick Surfass, who is the Executive Director of the American Biogas Council. Patrick has led the American Biogas Council since it was formed in 2010, when he helped 22 companies come together to form the first and still only trade association representing the entire biogas industry in the United States. The American Biogas Council now represents over 250 organizations, including Raceline, and has a network of more than 16,000 stakeholders in the biogas industry. Also joining us is Jim Webb. Originally, we were going to have Craig Westerbeek, but Craig was called to Utah to meet with the governor today on one of our large biogas projects out there. So we're very thankful for Jim being able to step in. Jim's the Director of Environmental and Public Affairs for Smithfield Foods in the Rocky Mountain Division of Smithfield Hog Production. As Director of Environmental and Public Affairs for the Rocky Mountain Division, Jim oversees and directs many of the areas within the company, including environmental compliance and affairs, property management, governmental and public affairs, and renewable projects for the division. He also serves as Vice President of the Utah Pork Producers Association and is on the State of Utah Board of Water Quality. Additionally, he serves or has served on many state committees and boards. The order we're going to speak in today will be Patrick first, followed by Jim, then followed by myself. So at this time, I'm happy to hand it over to Patrick. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Brandon. And thanks to you and Jim and Josh and Travis and everyone here for the opportunity to be able to speak to all of you today. Good morning. I'm speaking to you from DC today, where the American Biogas Council is headquartered. And next slide, please. We are focused on building more biogas systems. And, I think you might have heard Brandon say that we had about 230 members. This slide from last week or 2 weeks ago is 250 members. We're up to 260 today. We are in a growth mode as an industry, and our interest is helping to get more biogas systems developed. So we represent companies all over the industry, the entire breadth, and we're very proud of that because the industry is so diverse. Next slide, please. So just a little basics here, and then I'll tell you about what I'm going to speak about. So this session is about renewable natural gas, and I like to make sure that we're all using the same lingo here, especially if we've got some policymakers. I actually just testified in Maine yesterday just to make sure that they had a definition of renewable natural gas that actually looked like the definition for biogas. And so this is just something, this is part of our job for the industry. But biogas is the raw gas that comes out of a biogas system. So whether it be an anaerobic digester or a landfill, that biogas is going to be mostly methane and CO2. And when you process that gas and you basically are just removing the non-methane constituents, you're left with essentially pure methane. I'm simplifying this pretty significantly. But when you have pure methane, like 97 to 99+% methane, it's interchangeable with a natural gas pipeline. And at that point, you can't really recognize the RNG molecule from a regular conventional natural gas molecule, except for it's been renewably produced, and you just know that because of where it came from, but it's completely interchangeable. So RNG, when we talk about that, is pipeline interchangeable gas. You don't put biogas in the pipelines, you put RNG in the pipelines, and you generally want to do that because you're trying to get it from the producer to your customer. Next slide, please. So I was really struggling, and Travis and Josh and Brandon were all kind of subjected to my many questions about who was going to be in the audience today and how much do we cover basics versus policy. I can just tell you that all of us are equipped to get into any level of detail that you want. I'm going to try to start at a very beginning level to make sure that anyone that's not really familiar with biogas systems, that you have a basic level of understanding of how all this works and really how these systems are tools for you. And what you should be taking away from this graph, besides the basic way that biogas systems work, where you have this central tank, that takes in organic material. Usually it's non-woody organic material, and you can see all different kinds at the top there: manure, wastewater, sludge, food waste. You're putting that organic material into a tank. The microbes that are already present in that material, you create a nice warm environment where they multiply, and they literally eat up the organic material and burp out methane. And that methane is captured in the flexible roof or covers in the case of Brandon's and Jim's projects. And you capture all of that methane, and then you use that to basically displace fossil fuels most of the time. And all the things at the bottom there, all the different products that biogas systems can produce. So you've got your gas-related products on the left there, your biogas, electricity, vehicle fuel, into the pipeline to use whatever you use natural gas for, heat. These are some of the most common products, although we also create bioplastics and things like that. And then the solids and liquids also come out, and you can turn those into usually some kind of soil amendment, although some people are even making building materials out of them. But usually it's used as a soil amendment, and usually you're splitting the solids and the liquids and using those a little bit differently, just like you would use liquids and solids differently and spreading on crops or in your garden, for example, for fertilizing. So if there's one thing to take away here, it's the very breadth that we can handle all kinds of organic material coming in, and we can create all kinds of different products. And the trick here for using biogas systems is, what feedstocks do you have in this particular area, and what products do you need? And you design the biogas system to help make that match. Next slide. So these are going to be a little bit quick. I wanted to give anyone who's not familiar with these some visuals for what we're talking about. We do more than dairy on the left there, and swine in the middle. We also handle poultry litter, or any kind of manure. On the bottom there, you can see a loader there scraping the manure from a dairy milking barn into basically what would be a hole in a pit, so that manure can be digested in a biogas system. And on the right there, you can see a truck of food waste coming from Walt Disney World going to a digester down in Florida. That's what you take the cans from the restaurants and things like that. They all get dumped into the truck, and that gets dumped into a receiving area and ground up into basically a smoothie that then goes into the biogas system. And then you can see a whole bunch of nacho cheese sauce that did not meet spec, could not be sold. So it was just delivered in the plastic bags, and you have to have equipment that splits those plastic bag open and recycles the cheese material. You end up having to throw the plastic bags away because it's not really possible to recycle those, but depackage those. Next slide. Here's just some visuals for those biogas uses. So electricity, generally we're making electricity using an engine, a natural gas engine, but it could be a microturbine or a fuel cell as well. Heat there on the bottom, just like in your home, if you use gas for heat. Dell Computers actually I talked about bioplastics. They actually shipped a lot of their computers in plastic bags made from biogas. Biogas has a hydrocarbon in it, methane, and so you can do all kinds of things with hydrocarbons, including making plastic. And then you can see some truck fueling. Their heavy duty truck fueling is the fastest growing part of the industry. I'll get to that in a little bit. Next slide. And here's what the digested material looks like. So you can see some liquids there on the bottom right. On the bottom right there, that food scrap project actually happens to be that Walt Disney World project I mentioned earlier. And on the left side, you can see what I'm pretty sure are two dairy-related digestates there as well. And that's the digested material after it's been processed by the biogas system. Next slide. And if you're doing really well, you take that digested material and you create it into products that are sold like at Walmart and on Amazon, like Magic Dirt is. You do what Impact Bioenergy is doing, and you sell the digestate coming from the biogas system in the back of a brewery in Washington State. You sell it in a growler so people can pour that in their flowers at home. Trash Can is sold on Amazon. Bloom is sold at Lowe's around the DC area. So lots of different soil products there as well. And one of the things I'd like for you to take away also from this is there are not just energy benefits, there's a lot of non-energy benefits as well. Next slide. And here's just a few pictures here. It's really hard to capture a biogas system without an aerial view of the whole thing. But we've got, I don't think it's a Smithfield operated farm. It might be there, but it's in North Carolina. That's an old manure lagoon where those people are standing. That's been covered by basically like this huge rubber tarp. And they're standing on the biogas. So there's manure under there that's digesting in a lagoon style digester. And that's the flexible roof that's capturing all the methane. that's being generated from the manure. You got one in Wisconsin there. It's a dairy related project, and you've got a food scrap project on the right there in California that's making vehicle fuel and RNG from their project. Next slide. All right, so now that you have some kind of general familiarity with biogas systems, let's talk about the market a little bit. Currently in the US, in all 50 states, there are biogas systems. There's about 2,000 operational systems around the country. So there's a lot, but when you compare that to the potential in the industry, we have really just scratched the surface. We count at least 15,000 new systems that could be developed. And I'll show you, there's a fact sheet that we have at the end here. You can find it on our website for Missouri or for any state. You can see what that potential is in any given state. And if you look at the numbers on the left here, which kind of breaks down the current biogas systems and the potential biogas systems by different categories like on-farm and wastewater, food scrap, and landfill, you can see that they are currently everywhere, although there's a lot of opportunity for growth in the agriculture and food scrap area in particular. But the potential is everywhere. And, you know, even though we only have about 150 operational RNG projects in the country right now out of those 2,200, that basically means the rest of those are producing electricity. That really has a lot to do with our policies in the US. We have had historically policies that have been really supporting electricity projects like solar, wind, and biogas electricity, but not RNG. That has really shifted over the last couple of years, and RNG projects, I would say about 9 out of every 10 projects in development right now are being developed as RNG projects. And that's really due to very strong state and federal policy, especially in California. And then if we are be able to realize this total potential, we're talking about a lot of new investment, billions of dollars of new investments, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and great economic push wherever you are. Next slide. So the reason that we have this opportunity is because of all the organic waste that we have. It is everywhere. Millions of tons of food waste, billions of gallons of wastewater that have to be processed every day, and billions of animals that are making manure every day. And for those of you that are not in the ag sector, just to use a dairy cow reference here, every full-size dairy cow produces about a person of poop every single day, a person of manure. That's like 120 to 150 pounds of manure every single day. We've got to find a way to manage that. And that's why there's a huge opportunity here. Next slide. So here's my attempt here to give you most of the benefits of biogas systems. And what I think you will want to take away from this slide is that there's something here for everyone. And usually every biogas system is going to be driven by one or two of these benefits. That's going to be the reason that it was developed. Is it for lowering a company's carbon footprint and greenhouse gas reductions? Is it just to produce renewable energy because energy is needed, and maybe the revenue from that energy, to especially if it's RNG, using our federal and state policies? Is it to create jobs? Is it just to protect the watershed, to be able to keep nutrients out of the waterways? Or in the case of South Chicago, is a facility trying to turn brown fields into green fields by improving the soil health and growing crops for urban areas that are food deserts? There's opportunity everywhere, rural and urban. Next slide. So here is my policy slide, and this is where I'm going to go very light on this because I know Brandon and Jim can get into this more if we want to. We can get into this in questions. But the big circle there on RNG drivers, that's where all those 9 out of 10 project developments, that's where that's happening. So there's a federal renewable fuel standard administered by the EPA, and a California low carbon fuel standard administered by CARB. And what those programs basically allow you to do is to take RNG, if you're making RNG, taking your biogas and turning it into RNG, you, instead of selling that for what you can sell natural gas for at $3 an MMBTU, you can maybe sell that for like $9 to $90 an MMBTU. And that margin there is what has so many companies excited about building biogas systems and trying to get involved in this industry. There are other drivers as well, food waste recycling policies to encourage food waste to be recycled. We've got 9 states that have those. Other states are trying to develop LCFS related programs. Washington just passed theirs on Sunday. It's to the governor's desk. And we also have companies like L'Oreal and Cargill and Anheuser-Busch and others who are just deciding that they want to buy RNG instead of conventional gas to be able to lower their carbon footprint. Next slide. And this is my next to last slide here. So thanks for bearing with me here as I try to take out the fire hose here and see if you guys can drink from it with all of this. So this is why, from a carbon perspective, biogas systems are so attractive. And because they're so attractive from a carbon perspective, that's why they can be so lucrative. This is a graph of all the different kinds of renewable fuel that's generated in California under their low carbon fuel standard. That was one of the programs and one of the major drivers I mentioned earlier. So you can see there's biodiesel in those blue bubbles at the top and renewable diesel in the brown ones. Down near the bottom, you've got electricity projects. So those are basically like solar to wind to electric vehicles. These are all vehicle related programs in this particular case. And those yellow dots in the middle are your biogas. So you have some like landfill projects that are only a minor reduction in greenhouse gases from the dotted black line, which is basically represents conventional gasoline and diesel vehicles. But even those are offering a 30 to 40% decline. Most projects are basically starting around a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And then you look at some of the dairies and the hog projects and even a hog farm going to biogas to electricity to electric vehicles. And you start seeing you are way on the negative side of zero. Those are carbon negative projects. And the reason that you have that is because you're reducing carbon emissions from both displacing fossil fuels in vehicles, but also reducing emissions from the farm practices and the manure management practices as well. And you get both of those benefits, you add them together, and it often creates carbon negative projects. Way more attractive from a greenhouse gas perspective than even just going a simple solar to electricity to electric vehicle project. Even those projects are going to be around zero or slightly positive. So huge opportunity here to reduce carbon emissions, whether that's a local issue or a federal issue. And because you can reduce carbon emissions so much, that means you can generate more carbon credits, and that means more revenue for your project. So last slide here is just, I pulled out a screenshot of the Missouri fact sheet here. It shows you the currently operational systems in the state. You've got 11 wastewater projects and 12 farm-based projects and a few landfills and one food waste project. But you've got the potential everywhere, right? Not so much potential for new capture at landfills, but in your wastewater sector, food waste, and lots of farm-based opportunities in the state. If you want to look up this information directly, there's the link there. We have that for all 50 states. So thanks for allowing me to help walk you through the biogas industry, biogas systems. Look forward to hearing Brandon and Jim, and look forward to your questions later. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Patrick. That was great. What a good overview of the biogas industry. Next, we have Jim Webb with Smithfield Foods. Jim, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Craig was out here visiting with our governor here in Utah, and he said on Monday, "Hey Jim, would you mind doing this for me? I'll be on a plane back to North Carolina." So I'll do my best to cover for Craig. As most of you know, Craig's very schooled in this, and I'll try to pinch hit for him. So here at Smithfield, why don't you go ahead and advance to the next slide? We have a lot of sustainability programs, and we feel like our sustainability programs really differentiate our products and our brands from our other competitors, and then they also make us more efficient and competitive. And our biogas projects go right along with all of our sustainability programs. Go ahead, next. We have an overall carbon reduction goal at Smithfield, and it's to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2025 using a 2010 baseline. Next. So if you look at Smithfield, our overall contribution to our carbon footprint, really, we have 15 to 20% in grain farms and feed milling. The big leg is 40 to 45% in manure management. There's a portion that's consumers and consumer packaging. And then the last 15 to 20% is really the non-grain feed, the production, the packing plants, and some transportation. Next. So when we look at trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from our U.S. operations, we really focus on these four areas of manure management, the grain supply chain, the processing, and then just production efficiencies. Go ahead, next. We'll go ahead and watch this video that Craig has produced, and so why don't you go ahead and start that.
At Smithfield Foods, everything we do is focused on producing good food responsibly. As a global food company, we're committed to doing business in a sustainable way throughout our entire supply chain. That's one of the reasons why we were the first major protein company to set an ambitious goal to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions across our entire supply chain 25% by 2025. To reach that goal, we created a platform called Smithfield Renewables.
Smithfield Renewables is really the platform that we use to ensure that we make our carbon reduction goal. As part of that, you'll have biogas projects, you'll have fertilizer optimization, grain supply chain projects. You'll have a lot of different things that come together.
Important initiatives within the Smithfield Renewables platform include the utilization of renewable biological materials from manure treatment systems at our hog farms to create sustainable fertilizer, manure-to-energy projects that transform hog manure into renewable natural gas, and the reestablishment of native grasslands and prairies to create habitats for monarch butterflies and provide biomass for methane generation in renewable natural gas projects.
Smithfield has long been a leader in the area of sustainability and innovation in our industry. These type of projects just further allow us to explore opportunities beyond what we've already done.
Learn more about Smithfield Renewables at smithfieldfoods.com/renewables.
There we go. So, all of our biogas stuff right now is being focused on manure management. That's our largest contributor to our carbon footprint. Like I said before, the 40 to 45% of our carbon footprint is manure. So let's click on the next one. The way that we affect our carbon footprint with the 40 to 45% on manure management is really that we capture the gases that are released, and we convert those. We clean it up to make methane and renewable energy, and we found that this is the most cost-effective way to remove those greenhouse gases. Go ahead, next. So the way that we do that is that on our farms, the manure from the animals, just like Patrick was saying, the manure from the animals goes to a covered digester. The digester, the gases, the emissions are collected underneath a cover. The biogas then gets cleaned up through a filtering process to become 99% pure. Once it's pure methane, then it can be injected into a natural gas pipeline and transported to the end consumer, which is the customer to heat their homes or use for transportation or whatever they choose. Go ahead. And here are the benefits that we see at Smithfield of the renewable natural gas. I mean, obviously, it's to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. This type of energy produces 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Unlike other renewable energies like wind or solar that are only producing while the wind is blowing or the sun is shining, we can produce gas pretty much around the clock and process that gas. It definitely improves our manure management, and it also provides a revenue source for many of our family farmers. Okay, go ahead, next. So now I'll talk about some of the projects that we have. This is a map showing where we have projects that are now producing gas in Virginia and North Carolina, a lot in Missouri. We have a few one main project here in Utah, and then we're working on projects in California and Arizona, and there's probably even more that are coming. We have two joint ventures that are set up with our partners. One is Dominion Energy, that's under the Align name. So it's Align is the company name, and it's a joint venture between Smithfield and Dominion. And then we also have another joint venture with Raceline, and that joint venture is called Monarch. So I'll talk about those two different companies here separately on the next slides. Go ahead. So our first one is the Align project, which is the joint venture with Dominion. And we have projects that are underway or under development in all three, North Carolina, Virginia, and Utah. And really what we see is that it'll power 70,000 homes and businesses, which is the equivalent of taking 500,000 cars off the road or planting 40 million new trees. Next slide. Our next project is the Monarch Bioenergy, which is the joint venture between Raceline and Smithfield. And those projects are all in Missouri right now. And it's equivalent to taking 130,000 cars off the road. And we're aiming to produce 100% of our biogas of company-owned finishing farms in Missouri, and that is well underway. Go ahead. So really, I think this is my last slide, but we have the two largest manure to energy projects that are located on our farms in Missouri as well as in Utah, and those are underway and producing biogas. I think that is my last slide, and look forward to the panel discussion. Yep.
Thanks, Jim. We sure appreciate you stepping in there for Craig and doing a great job. Really appreciate it and appreciate our partnership. All right, I'll be the final speaker today. As you heard, Patrick and Jim, renewable natural gas is really coming on as a viable energy source. It's clean, it's affordable, it's reliable, it's waste derived, meaning we solve problems in eliminating waste and turning it into a renewable energy source. As organic waste breaks down, it emits methane, which is naturally occurring, but potent and a very harmful greenhouse gas emission. At Raceline, we're trying to address greenhouse gas emissions while creating a new market for agriculture and improving our ecology while providing wildlife benefits. As Patrick talked about, the policy is starting to spread across the country. California has really been the hub historically. Their low carbon fuel standard has set the bar for renewable natural gas, and they really measure the value of your gas based on your carbon intensity score. A lot of factors go into how your gas is scored, but it has a lot to do with how much petroleum-based product you use in the creation, transportation, and usage of your gas. At Raceline, in our partnership with Smithfield through the Monarch joint venture, we're pushing -400 in our carbon intensity score, which is really at the very top of the market. Here in Missouri, we're very excited and a little surprised to be so far down the line on some legislation this year. We have completely the same language in both the Senate and the House. We have Senate Bill 141 and House Bill 488, which are renewable natural gas bills, again, with the same exact language. The Senate bill has passed the Senate and is now over in the House. The House bill has passed the House and is now over in the Senate. So we're really hoping one of those crosses the finish line and ends up on Governor Parsons' desk this year. This act will basically create a voluntary renewable natural gas program here in Missouri, and it'll allow renewable natural gas to be put into the grid really with no encumbrances. And the utilities are all behind this. They like the idea of using renewable natural gas specifically to meet their greenhouse gas and carbon standards and mandates without really having to change any of the infrastructure and having to invest outside of renewable natural gas equipment and, as I said, infrastructure. So it's pretty exciting times for not only our company, but our industry. And right here in Missouri, we're really going to set the bar for the Midwest if we can get this passed this year. So with that, Travis, if you'll please go to the next slide. So at Raceline, we're producing renewable natural gas, but our founder, Rudy, is very dedicated to ecosystem and wildlife. Next slide. We've seen these three work in odds with each other for way too long, and our VEN is to bring those three together. Next slide. Annual greenhouse gas emissions have skyrocketed. It's no secret anymore. I think Lindsey Graham came out and said he believes in climate change now. So I think we've actually got everyone at this point to believe in climate change. It's happening. Greenhouse gas emissions have skyrocketed, and we all have to do something to address this. This is our plan here at Raceline. Next slide. We're seeing it in cost as well. The natural disasters that we're experiencing across the country, the fires out west, the storms here in the Midwest, the hurricanes, the escalation of the disasters across our nation are costing us billions of dollars a year. Next slide. Population isn't slowing down either. We have more people that are going to require energy, that are going to require food. So while we're going to continue to produce food and supply these people with energy, we have to do it in a way that is much more environmentally friendly and beneficial to our landscape. Next slide. Ecosystem. Next slide. So soil erosion is a really big problem here in North Missouri and across the heartland. Cropland soil erosion at 5.6 tons per acre with a cost of about $44 billion a year. We see a lot of kind of archaic practices here in the heartland, especially in North Missouri, where we're really focusing the rollout of what we're going to call Horizon 2 at Raceline, which is set to address these issues. But that erosion is washing downstream, and it's taking a lot of the pesticides and insecticides into our waterways, costing us a ton of money in cleaning our water before it can be drinking water again, and then costing us a lot of money in the Gulf of Mexico through the problems of hypoxia. We have a plan to fix this with native grasses. Next slide. Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, we're more guilty than anybody for the problems that we're experiencing in the Gulf of Mexico, the extent of the hypoxic dead zone that's occurred down there. I don't know if anybody goes down to the Gulf to fish or recreate. I spend a lot of time down there, and it's disheartening when you go a few years later and areas of the marsh that you used to fish, they're just water. And we're seeing, it's almost like the equivalent of the rainforest, how much marsh we're losing. And there's a lot of economic reasons why that's very bad. Next slide. $350 million in fishing expenditures, $1.5 billion in property loss, nearly $1 billion in bottled water due to tainted water for people to drink. We're sending this down to our neighbors, and we need to do something about it. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So wildlife and habitat across the country is in crisis. We know about the megafauna. We know that there's polar bear problems, but nearly 40% of all species require some kind of urgent conservation action. Native species in most major land-based habitats have fallen by at least 20% in the last 100 years. Next slide. The Endangered Species Act, that's something you may think of as a positive right off the bat, but honestly, the Endangered Species Act is something that we really want to keep species off of. There's 1,600 on the list now. It's really hard to deal with a lot of the regulations that come into play when a species goes onto the act, and it's really hard to get them back off of the act. So if we can do some preventative maintenance on the habitat and these animals, keep them off of the list ahead of time, then we'll be doing everyone really a favor, including those species. Here in Missouri, the prairie chicken, the numbers dwindled to just dismal numbers. I mean, maybe an estimated 50 to 100 left when there used to be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of these incredible native birds. Now we have to go out to Nebraska or Kansas to even see one. Next slide. Next slide, please. So what we want to do at Raceline, back one. Back, please. There you go. So we want to improve wildlife. Oh, no, we're trying to get to the flower. Forward one. There we go. So we're in the partnership with Smithfield to digest the swine manure to gas, but we're also working on the restoration of native grasses. We have a vision to restore 30 million acres of native grass across the heartland in a 30-year period. We'll be able to digest those natives into renewable natural gas as well, while creating habitat and providing those benefits that are necessary to wildlife and pollinators. Next slide. Next slide. So currently we have 80 lagoons covered in North Missouri on Smithfield Farms. Lagoons are about a 4-acre pond. The hogs are in a very nice barn. Those barns have a graded floor system. Their manure goes into the lagoons. It's washed in there using recycled water. So we use almost no carbon-based electricity to do that. Through the natural process of anaerobic digestion, the covers that we put over these lagoons, they build up really large like a blimp. We suck that gas off. It goes through a gas purification system on site. And at 2 locations, it's directly injected into the natural gas grid. And at the rest of the locations, it's used, or it's transported through what we call a virtual pipeline, which is a high pressure tanking system. This is great for the local economy. It's great for people that live in the area. If you talk to any of the neighbors about how the air quality and their quality of life has improved since these covers have gone on the lagoons, which essentially eliminate the odor coming off of these farms, you have some happy neighbors. We're creating great jobs that are highly technical, well-paying, and we're allowing young men and women to find jobs in economically depressed areas that they may be from, but otherwise would have had to leave to achieve this kind of a position. So doing great things in rural Missouri and across the country. Next slide, please. We're currently working through a grant in conjunction with Iowa State and Penn State called Sea Change. It's a $10.5 million grant that's studying the feasibility and best practices of being able to plant, sustainably harvest, and digest cover crops and native grasses into renewable natural gas. It's looking like we will probably end up mixing that biomass into the lagoons to further create gas on the systems that we already have. This is going to be a great way to incentivize landowners to stop planting row crops on marginal lands that aren't producing enough revenue to even cover their input costs, restoring native grasses, outcompeting government for those acres. A lot of these acres are currently enrolled in CRP. At one time, we had over 40 million acres of Conservation Reserve Program lands being paid out by the government. We're hoping to be able to pay more from the government and return control of these lands to the landowners, harvest those native plants sustainably, meaning we won't do it during peak nesting times or peak migration times to make sure that the wildlife benefits stay intact. And then the ecological services that are provided by these grasses, including the deep and robust root systems, not only absorb water, but they block those pesticides and insecticides from entering into our waterways. Next slide. So really, we're trying to provide ecological services that benefit water, soil, climate change, habitat, carbon usage, and carbon sequestration, while producing a renewable energy source. Next slide. Once in a while, we let the engineers play with our slides, so they made this one. So this shows you kind of the whole system. what's going on with the clean water going into the lagoons to flush it, into the covered lagoons, and really everything that's going on in the entire system. It's pretty complex, but really what it breaks down to is nature takes care of breaking down the manure, breaking down the biomass. Through the natural process, methane and other undesirable gases are produced. We're able to separate those gases through our system. We're able to turn the methane into renewable natural gas and flare off the undesirables. Next slide. There's a lot of potential for this. In North Missouri alone, we see the potential to create 5.5 million decatherms per year. Last year, we generated close to 350,000. This year, our goal is going to be 600,000, and next year, our goal is 800,000, ramping up to that 5.5 million over time. With a revenue potential of nearly $250 million and the equivalent of removing about 29 million gallons of diesel fuel from our roadways. So that's petroleum-based products that will no longer be required, that'll be supplanted with a clean, renewable energy source. Next slide, please. Same information, different slide, really. Next slide. Now, when you take this out across the heartland, across the nation, we think 1.8 billion decatherms of energy per year. A lot of that coming from cover crops. We like to say that you should never see brown dirt on these agricultural fields. There's no reason to let these fields set dormant, allowing rain to fall on it and wash away whatever is on top of that soil, and to wash away the soil itself. So we think we can create this market of renewable energy production from cover crops, and essentially putting these farmers into a whole new economic market. Revenue potential of close to $65 billion, and the equivalent of removing 9.5 billion gallons of diesel fuel annually. Next slide. Next slide. So we know that agriculture has suffered some tough economic times. We're really excited about the potential of injecting a new market into agriculture and hoping to turn that net farm income around. Next slide. We think with the injection of RNG production into agriculture, we can do just that. Next slide. So thank you very much. I do see that we've had some questions in the chat room. I've also had some questions submitted by Travis. So Jim and Patrick, either one of you want to jump in? If we start here at the top, we've got how much do you source biogas from algae farms, and do you think there is more potential there? We do not do anything with algae farms at Raceline, and I don't think Smithfield does either. So Patrick, do you have any knowledge of farms?
Yeah, it's not done a lot, but there are some people who are trying to do it. There's lots of reasons to grow algae. You can use it to remove nutrients from waterways. I know they're doing a demonstration in New York with that. You can also use the algae to generate liquid biofuels and things like that, like biodiesels and stuff like that. Biogas systems can take any organic material. They can digest the algae. They can also digest the waste products from biofuels. There's actually a lot of biogas systems on ethanol producing facilities to handle their waste as well and lower the carbon footprint of the ethanol so they don't have to buy conventional gas, and they have a waste management solution there on site. So there's potential there. There's not a lot happening on it commercially, but if it's organic, we can digest it.
Answer. We got Richard is asking, what is the delta in the carbon footprint of RNG and natural gas?
So I can take that one. It's easiest probably to think about this in terms of transportation, just since these numbers are really easy. This is my slide that had all those different bubbles and then kind of the long circle around the yellow bubbles. So if you look at the total carbon intensity from production to use of natural gas in vehicles compared to RNG in vehicles, your conventional natural gas on a carbon intensity score is going to be at about a plus 100. I think that's like 100 tons of carbon per megajoule of energy. So a plus 100 for conventional natural gas. And then RNG is going to be anywhere from generally a plus 60 to a negative 600 or so. So there's a wide range there in terms of what the carbon footprint can be, and it all has to do with how you produce it and how much you are reducing emissions from what's done without the biogas system to what is done with the biogas and RNG system. So at worst, you're going to be cutting emissions by probably 40 to 50%, and at best you're going to be carbon negative by 6 to 7 times better than conventional natural gas.
Thank you very much. Jim asked, do you have to operate a CAFO, which is a confined animal feeding operation, to make this technology feasible? The answer to that is no. Renewable natural gas is also produced through landfills and other organic waste opportunities. If you're speaking specifically on the agriculture aspect of it, at this point, it's really a supply issue, and to be able to get enough manure to make a project like this viable, it has to be on a large scale farm. Ideally, we'll see the technology scale. I'm in the last 2 weeks right now of my executive MBA program at University of Missouri, and I wrote a paper on anaerobic digestion and getting it down to the household level. A dream, that's about as far as I can take it. So if there's any engineers in the room that want to partner up on how we can create digesters for our own homes, maybe that's something in the future. But for now, the large amount of manure that comes from these operations allows us to produce enough gas to make this a financially viable operation. It's not something that's happening on small family farms yet, but I think Jim might be able to jump in and explain how the small family farmer that's raising livestock is ultimately selling to one of these finishing farms. So they are invested in it as well, kind of in a chain, if you will. So that's one aspect of it. And the native grasses, that's going to be another aspect. The native grass won't be able to achieve a carbon intensity score nearly as low as the swine manure gas. The close concentration of the operations on one farm is what keeps that fuel usage down. With the native grasses, we're likely going to have to use quite a bit of tractors, quite a bit of transportation, which will raise the carbon intensity score and decrease the value of the gas, which will be great for here in Missouri if we get this bill passed this year, creating a pathway for using the renewable fuel right here at home instead of being credited for it from California.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that these farms, you have these economies of scale and scope, and so you do have to reach those numbers just to justify the taps into the natural gas lines or whatever. And so, we have looked at projects that we get a lot of smaller farms. We get the manure from those smaller farms and put them into a digester so that we can achieve those economies of scale. And we are doing that somewhat in North Carolina, where we will have, long pipelines to get all of the biogas into one area off of a bunch of smaller farms.
So Jim and Brandon, it's common for these RNG systems, not biogas. Biogas systems can be on large and small, but when you talk about RNG and the equipment for gas upgrading and pipeline injection, it's common for them to be on large farms. But you don't need a CAFO to make it work. You just need enough manure to make it work, right? So if you can cluster up smaller farms and put biogas systems on those, but then only one RNG upgrading and injection spot, then you can make it work without the CAFOs, right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
So I think that's really important because it is a really common perception. And Brandon, I saw one of the other questions as I skipped ahead here. I think there's another question about, how much, what are the responses to the common criticisms that biogas systems can only work on CAFOs? And I think there's a couple different things to do to respond here. And one of them is biogas systems, which can go to electricity and can go to heat and are doing recycling and things like that. They can be on any size farm. The real question here is whether you are going to spend the money to buy the RNG equipment and injection equipment. If you're doing that, then that's the part that's really expensive, and that's where you need more material, more organic material feeding into that. The other thing that I think is really important to point out here is that if we didn't have these biogas systems, we'd be putting tons of methane emissions into the atmosphere and doing lots of other things. Brandon and Jim, I all talked about the non-energy benefits here as well in terms of better manure management practices, and all of those things are being done in addition. And I think it's really important to make sure that we're not just looking at this from an energy perspective, but the whole benefits of putting these systems in place and doing better manure management and more recycling and improving soil health and things like that.
Yeah, I'll let Jim jump in as well, but it really is impressive when you visit one of these farms up north and see the benefits that these systems have on those large farms. I mean, you literally can stand next to a lagoon and have a hard time smelling it at this point. It's great for the local residents in the areas around these that have had to deal with those odors historically. We don't have a lot of locations in North Missouri where we have opportunities for floods to wash a lagoon into a waterway, but that has happened in other parts of the country. These lagoon covers are very tight. I mean, we can't let air get out, so it's nearly impossible for water to get in. So we're also protecting the waterways locally around these farms. So there's a lot of environmental benefits, none larger than the capturing of the greenhouse gases that would otherwise be emitted into our atmosphere, contributing to climate change. So the environmental benefits of these systems on these farms are certainly great. And Smithfield has put their money where their mouth is, and they've not only taken all their farms and done this in North Missouri, but as Jim said, they're expanding into Utah, North Carolina, and eventually across the country. So a lot of improvements have been put in place by these systems.
I think you're also going to see on the smaller and medium-sized farms, I think you're going to see more electricity projects. We just had one go live at like a 300, 400 head dairy last year. That was dairy manure plus food waste to electricity. And there's actually one, and for those of you that will get our slides afterwards, there's one, a Rockwood farm in Massachusetts, 400 dairy cow project. Those are probably going to go to electricity. And so I think what we're going to see there is we're going to either see utilities or electricity folks buying the gas instead of going to RNG. You're going to see electricity purchases, and maybe some of those going to electric vehicles. So I think you're going to see a gap. You're going to see some of the larger projects or the clusters going to RNG, and you're going to see the smaller projects going to electricity, the smaller farms going to electricity.
I think we can end on, there's one last question here. Is there currently enough infrastructure in Missouri to utilize this RNG for municipalities and at the utilities, or is this energy only used directly at the farms? So I'll take the first stab at this. The energy is not used at the farms. It's far too valuable. We're getting a significant credit from California through their low carbon fuel standard on top of a D3 RIN, which is renewable identification number. So the amount of money that's generated by these credits makes our gas way too valuable for us to burn on site. What's happening is it's going into the natural gas grid. It's not leaving Missouri, but we're still getting credited by the state of California. We've built many miles of pipeline already to connect our farms to the grid. So the infrastructure is in place. And as I said, what we're really excited about is we've identified a 200,000 acre area in the Grand River watershed in north central Missouri that we want to use as the original site of Horizon 2, where we'll roll out our native grass program. And we have the renewable natural gas legislation in place, then that, as I said, that gas won't be as valuable in the California market or in other low carbon fuel standard markets. So that gas will be hopefully utilized by the municipalities and utilities here in Missouri. So Patrick, if you want to jump in, or if Jim, if you want to jump in on that as well.
I mean, I'll jump in. I mean, we've developed a lot of projects, and their infrastructure is always an issue. I mean, infrastructure, finding the right gas line that you can interconnect with, the power, and in our agricultural industry, we're typically pretty remote, and so it requires a long pipeline to get to the interconnect, and so that's always a huge cost that we always face. And we face that in every project that I've been involved in, and I don't know specifically maybe about Missouri, but I know that infrastructure is always an issue on these projects.
Last one just popped in. Looks like we got 2 minutes.
Could I add to that a little bit, Brandon?
Yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt, but I see the questions really focusing on municipalities and utilities, and I just want to say that, in Missouri there are 116 wastewater facilities that do not have biogas systems in the state, but are big enough to be able to support a biogas system. And wastewater facilities generally use the most energy out of any municipal need. So there's a huge opportunity in Missouri for biogas systems at your wastewater facilities. And then for your utilities, part of the bills that that Brandon was talking about is to create an RNG program in the state. And it's not very specifically defined in the legislation, but what typically happens is you want to create a program that allows the utilities to do two things. One is you want the utilities to be able to buy the renewable natural gas to offset their carbon footprint. And the second thing is you want the utilities to be able to procure the RNG and sell it on to their gas customers as well. And that needs to be set up in Missouri. So there's a huge potential to be able to do that, so that gas customers in Missouri can choose to buy renewable gas over conventional natural gas, and that the utilities themselves are able to lower their carbon footprints by displacing conventional natural gas with renewable natural gas. So both of those opportunities are pretty significant in Missouri. They're not going to be farm related, which is obviously Brandon and Jim's expertise here, but from a municipal and utility perspective, certainly opportunity there.
And it is 11:15. I think that answered the last question too, Patrick. So Patrick, Jim, thank you very much. Wonderful job. Jim, thanks for jumping in and pinch hitting for us. You did awesome. Josh and Travis, we appreciate you having us. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Brandon and Jim. Yes, fantastic. Very interesting. It's always good, in my opinion, to hear about a topic that Missouri has an opportunity for growth, for engagement on the economic development and the energy side, connecting those two. So to me, a lot of positive opportunities lay before us in this sector. So thank you all very much for your pardon me, presentation and information. Our next session is on infrastructure legislation.